Hey guys, in this lesson, we're going to talk about shapes in Illustrator and how we can cast realistic shadow lines from them in the plan view. But before we do that, we're going to go back a couple steps and have a look in our AutoCAD file to see how we can actually get to making these realistic shadows in Illustrator. So we're back in AutoCAD. Let's say we're happy with how much we've pared these lines down. We're happy with the amount of information that we would be importing into Illustrator. But there's one easy step that we're going to take before we actually do our import. It's really important for you to have your lines, your polylines, be as complete as possible so that they'll import to being the most complete shape possible in Illustrator. So as we can see here, we've got this building footprint. That all looks good, but we see that it's a little bit fragmented. We're going to use the p-edit command that we discussed in a previous video to fix that. So we will type p-edit for p-edit, hit enter as a command. We're going to, before we select anything, we're going to hit M for multiple, or select it in the command line if we wish. Hit enter, and now we will select the polylines that we want to close into a complete polyline. Let's left click this one and this one and hit enter. Now we're going to specify J for join, hit enter, enter fuzz distance of 0, perfect. We'll hit enter once more, no need to change that, and enter once more. And just like that, if we bring our cursor over this building footprint, we see that is now a closed polyline. Great. So we'll say we've gone through the entire section we want to import. We're happy with all of those footprints. That's all great. Now it's time for us to jump over to setting up a page layout that we can import. So reviewing from our previous video on this, we're going to move over to our paper space. We'll go up to Layout tab, left click. We'll go to Page Setup, left click. In Page Setup Manager, we're going to move over to Modify, left click. We're going to, for printing plot, we're going to bring this down to DWG to PDF. We're going to adjust our paper size to ArcD, 36 wide by 24 vertically. We'll go to drop down. We'll select ArcD. The plot area set to layout. We're going to adjust our scale to 1:1. We're going to make sure it is in millimeters, 1:1 for units. We'll move up to plot style, left click. We can set it to AutoCAD light, even though it doesn't really matter because all of this is just going to go right into Illustrator from viewport anyway. Left click. Assuming we're happy with everything we see here, we can go to OK. And now we can go to close. And just like that, we've now got a page setup that is 36 inches wide by 24 inches vertically. Now it's time for us to adjust our viewport so that it's showing the content we want to show at a size we're happy with. Let's say we're starting from scratch, no viewport. To create a new viewport, we will move up to the Layout tab in Paper Space. For Layout Viewports panel, we will select Rectangular, left click, specify a start and end point. And now it's time for us to actually create a scale for this viewport. We'll double click into it to activate it. Hold our middle scroll wheel down just to center it. Double click outside of it to exit it. Okay, time for us to create a new scale. Let's say we want to make this viewport a scale of 1 to 500, meaning the actual part of the street will be 500 times bigger than what we're showing here. Here's how we're going to do it. We will left click the frame of this viewport, left click. We're going to move down to the status bar. We will go to the click to adjust scale. We'll find the drop down menu, left click. And because we don't see 1 to 500 anywhere here, we will scroll down to custom, and we're going to make that scale size for ourselves. Left click. We're going to go to add, because again, it's not on here. And we're going to title this scale 1 to 500. Now, as we discussed briefly in the page setup video, as we recall, the paper units are in millimeters, whereas our drawing is in meters. So that means 1,000 millimeters of paper unit would be equal to 1 meter of drawing unit. But in this case, it's going to be 1 to 500. So we're going to change that to 1,000 millimeters of paper unit is equal to 500 drawing units. So we've got 1,000 to 500 set up. We'll go OK. And now we've got that viewport crafted. We can go OK. We will select that viewport once more, left click the frame, move down to our adjust scale prompt, and now we will pick 1 to 500. And sure enough, now we've got a viewport to scale that is 1/500th the size of the actual thing. Let's go ahead and let's select that viewport once more. Now that we're happy with the scale, let's go ahead and lock it. Left click the lock icon. So we say we're happy with that. Great. Now it's time for us to get into exporting this to something we can import into Illustrator. Let's move up to the File dropdown in the top left corner. Left click. We're going to scroll down to Save As. And now we'll pick a spot to save it. But you must remember, when you're importing anything into Illustrator, you must save it as a 2010 version of AutoCAD, because that is just typically more compatible. It imports more easily. And we'll also make sure that when we're naming our file, we're demarcating it accordingly. 17th Avenue Street, point 2010. There, now I'll be able to find it easily. Let's go ahead and hit Save. Now we're over in Illustrator. So we're going to move up to File, left click. We're going to move down to Open, select. We're going to pick that file we just saved. Here it is, left click. We'll move down to Open. Now this is a really key step where you must remember that your scaling is going to be set 1 to 1, but in millimeters. Adjust this to 1 so it looks exactly like this. If we're happy with the layout, as you recall, this is what our page layout was titled in Paperspace, so that's perfect. Then we can just hit OK. And it's going to import everything that we just looked at in our Paperspace viewport in AutoCAD. Hit OK once more. So we've successfully imported all of those lines into Illustrator. Now I'm going to personally recommend this next step for housekeeping reasons and to keep everything on one layer, as these are all the lines and pieces of line work that we're going to be working with on this step. We're going to left click and hold, drag a selection box over all of this content and release. And then we're going to hit Control C. Now we're going to move over to the layer icon over on the right side here. Let's left click. We can say we've got all the layers that just got imported from AutoCAD. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a new layer. We're going to do this by moving down to the plus sign on the layer tab, left clicking, and we're going to title this line work. Now this is also going to be a good exercise for us turning our visibility off the other layers. Let's go ahead and turn all of these other layers off. Now, once we have the line work layer selected and active, we're going to hit Control V, and now all of that stuff has been pasted onto one layer. So it's going to be that much easier to work with. And for the sake of housekeeping and to keep our layer board as clean and tidy as possible, let's go ahead and select all these other layers that we now don't really need and delete them. You can select all of these very quickly by clicking the top layer that you don't want, scrolling down to the bottom layer you don't want, holding Shift down, and then left clicking the bottom layer. And that will do a quick select of everything. So once more, that's you click the top layer you don't want, scroll down to the bottom, pick the bottom layer you don't want, hold down Shift, and left click once again. Then you've got everything selected. Then you're going to left click and hold, really any of these, because it's a mass selection, and you're going to drag down to the trash icon and then release that left click, and that deletes everything. Now that we've got all the line work we want on one layer, here's what we're going to do to make this a little more visible, because as you can see, we're dealing with lines of different colors. We don't really want that. But before we get into that, let's quickly discuss what a shape in Illustrator is made up of. In Illustrator, a shape is made up of two parts. It's got a fill, as represented here in green, and a line that essentially serves to define the perimeter of that shape. When we select this shape right here, a fill color and a line color, and we can adjust both. We can adjust both by moving over here to the mobile toolbar, and as you can see, you have the fill and the stroke outline, both of which you can edit very easily. Let's say I want to edit the outline. I will double click the outline portion, this graphic on the toolbar, double click, and I will be able to adjust my color using the color picker as I see fit. I can make it any color I want. I can make it blue or whatever. If I want to adjust the fill color, I will move over and I will select the solid colored portion of this icon. Left click, and suddenly that's selected and brought to the front. I will double click that. And by double clicking it, then I can go to color picker and once again pick any color I like and hit OK. That's going to be very useful to us in just a moment. Let's go ahead and select all of the line work that we've got on this new line work layer. Let's left click and hold, drag a selection box over all of this material, and release that left click. Now we can move over to the fill and stroke icon on the mobile toolbar. We double click the stroke portion of the icon, and we can use the color picker to select a black outline. All right, just like that, that's already looking better. We're halfway there. Now that we've got all these polylines we just imported from AutoCAD converted into actual stroke lines in Illustrator, we can start adjusting the weights of these different lines, the stroke weights. Let's say we want the building outlines to appear more dominant in our graphic than the curb lines. We can do this very easily. We can do this by selecting whatever we want to adjust the weight of, but left clicking and then moving up to the portion of the AutoCAD ribbon that says stroke for stroke weight. From here we can move over to this drop down menu, left click, and as you can see there will be a series of different options in terms of what we can pick for our stroke. We can specify our own number if we wish, but for now let's just try seeing what happens if we pick a 3-point stroke weight. Left click, and just like that, we've now changed the weight, that stroke. We can adjust all of these as we wish. As you can see, you can either go to the drop-down menu or you have the option to specify a number in the stroke weight command bar. We can type any number we like, 2, 2.5, 2.25. You can get as specific as you wish with your stroke weight. You'll get an opportunity to do some playing around with this, but as you can see, the fact that this is a complete and closed outline is the main reason why it's such a benefit to have all of these lines be closed polylines back in AutoCAD and before we import them. By selecting this shape here, we can also see how we can easily adjust the fill on this shape. Let's left click and we will move over to the stroke and fill icon on the movable toolbar. We will select the square portion of this icon, double click it, and from here we can specify any color we want, and that will be the color that fills this shape. Just for the sake of demonstration, I'll show you what it looks like when we pick a fill color like green. We'll left click, drag to the color on the color picker we like, hit OK, and as you can see, that becomes the color that this shape is now filled with. Let's go ahead and adjust that so that the fill color is white instead. Left click, with the shape selected, move down to the fill portion, the fill and stroke, double click, select and drag to white on the color picker. That looks good. Hit OK, and there we have it. And you can do this to all of these shapes. And again, this is why it really helps that before we imported it, we made sure these were all closed polylines, so they can be adjusted in fill and stroke as a closed shape. Now let's take a moment to discuss how shadows are projected in Illustrator. Traditional shadow tools in graphics programs like this one might encourage you to project a shadow like the one you see in shape A here. But when you think about it, this wouldn't be realistic for our plan view because our plan view is reflecting a shadow from a built mass. It would project a shadow from the faces we're not able to see in plan, like you see in shape B here. It's not projecting from a flat face like we see in shape A. It's projecting from built walls that are invisible from this perspective in plan view, but still need to be shown anyway. So I'm going to show you how we accomplish this in Illustrator. I recommend we begin by moving over to the layers icon, left clicking, and moving down to the create new layer prompt. Left click. We're going to title this layer Shadows. Perfect. So let's click, left click, and drag it down so that it's beneath line work. Now we're going to go ahead and select the line work layer, left click, and drag, and select everything we're hoping to project a shadow of. Release. Now that we have everything selected, we'll go Control C. Now we're going to go ahead and lock this layer, move down to the shadows layer, and we're going to hit Control V. And if we drag this outside the artboard, we'll see perfect. Those are all outlined and filled in. Great, that's exactly what we want. What we're going to do is with all of these selected and on this new layer, we're going to move over to the fill and stroke icon. We're going to adjust the stroke so that instead of having a color on it, we're going to move down here to the none prompt just below. We're going to left click, and just like that, now where there was a stroke color, that stroke color is currently invisible. Perfect. Now we're going to move back over to fill and stroke, double click the fill portion of the icon, and using the color picker, we will select black. Perfect. Let's go ahead and hit OK. Great. So now this is already looking exactly like how we want it to look. Let's select all, do a click and drag, and we're going to drag this so that it's just underneath this layer that we currently have locked. Click. Perfect. Now we're ready for the next step. And this is where it's really important that we have everything that we just had on line work locked. Because when we do a select here, we only want to manipulate what we have on our shadow layer. Now watch this. Let's left click and drag over everything we just put underneath. We're going to move up to the Effect tab. Left click. We're going to move down to Distort and Transform. We're going to slide over and we're going to pick Transform from this section. Let's left click. Now let's see what happens if we use the Move prompt. What this is essentially going to do is transform what we have with the black fill, and it's essentially going to shift it as we instruct Illustrator to. Let's, for the sake of demonstration, see what happens if I left click the slider and I drag it just a little bit, just to demonstrate what this can do. So right off the bat, that doesn't look too bad. It looks like it's projecting something, but watch what happens when I then adjust the vertical slider. Left click and drag. See? Recall the graphic we just took a look at. This does show a projection, but this isn't how it would cast if it was a 3D built physical form with walls. So let's put these both back to 0, and I'll show you how we execute this part properly so that it actually projects as a building in plan view would. We're not going to worry about scaling as it's a shadow, so we're happy with the size that we've got. We're going to focus on the Move tool. We're still going to go ahead and adjust the Move portion of Transform Effect, but there's a very key step that's going to follow it. So just for now, let's go ahead and let's specify 0.01 for both horizontal and vertical. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. That's an impossibly small move shift. How is that any good? How is that useful to us? Well, I'll show you. If we move down to copies, essentially, we're going to input a number of copies, and that's going to be the number of times that this move is going to take place. So we're going to type, let's say, 30 copies, and watch what happens. Type 30. We can deselect to see a preview. Now look at that. That's already much more realistic looking. And the idea there is that just made that 0.01 copy, but then it did that copy and move 30 times. So if we hit OK and we zoom in by, as a reminder, selecting Alt, holding it down, and using a scroll wheel to move in, look at that. That's a 0.01 move, both horizontal and vertically, happening, count them up, 30 times. So when we zoom out, that's a pretty realistic and pretty convincing looking shadow. Now, you're probably thinking, yeah, that looks like a realistic shadow, but that's way too dark. Well, that's very easy to fix too, thanks to our opacity tool, which you can find up in the top ribbon of Illustrator right here. So here's what we do. Let's left click, drag over everything that we just used the transform to project shadows with. We'll do a select. We're going to move up to opacity. It's currently at 100%. Let's go ahead and adjust that to, we'll punch in 50 and hit enter. Now, that's already looking much more reasonable. Now, you've probably already spotted a little bit of an issue with this. Have a look here. We changed all of these transformed shapes so that they are transparent. But look at this. The transparencies here are combining and overlapping, meaning they're producing a darker gray. Naturally, shadows don't do this. So what we're going to do right now is we have a workaround for this problem. We're going to scroll out a little bit. We're going to hit Control Z. We're going to undo that opacity change that we just made. And here's what we're going to do instead. We're going to move over to the Layers panel. And again, here's why it's really useful that we're keeping shadows on one layer and line work on the other. We're going to move over to this little circle over on the right, and that's going to select everything on that layer. Left click. Once we've got that little circle on the Layers panel selected, now Illustrator knows we are trying to select everything on that layer as like a single unit. So watch what happens once we have everything selected using this method, using the select all on the Layers panel. Now when we go up to opacity, right up here, watch what happens. We'll change this to 50, 5, 0. We'll hit enter. And as you can see, there's no overlap. It's a consistent opacity of shadow all the way around, which, when you think about it, is exactly what a real shadow would do. So again, just remember the select all circle on the shadows layer. That's your ticket to a consistent opacity on your shadows in plan view.